It was a crisp autumn weekend when I arrived at the lakeside cabin, my weekend bag slung over my shoulder and a six-pack of craft beer dangling from my fingertips. The cabin belonged to Jake's family, a rustic two-bedroom getaway with wooden walls that smelled of pine and memories. I'd known Jake since college, 7 years of friendship that had weathered graduation, career changes, and several of his relationships. This weekend was meant to be special, though, because for the first time, Jake was introducing me to Ryan, his boyfriend of 6 months. I'd heard all about Ryan through late-night phone calls and text messages, how they'd met at a coffee shop, how Ryan made Jake laugh in ways I'd never seen before, how Jake thought this might be the one. I was happy for my friend, truly I was, but there was also this nagging feeling in my chest that I couldn't quite name. The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the cabin. Through the large picture window, I could see them inside. Jake's familiar silhouette moving around the kitchen, and another figure I assumed was Ryan. My stomach tightened with an unexpected nervousness. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the cool lake air before knocking on the door. Jake swung it open immediately, his face lighting up with that smile I knew so well. "Alex, you made it," he exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. Over his shoulder, I caught my first glimpse of Ryan, tall, with dark curly hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners as he smiled at me. "So you're the famous Alex," Ryan said, stepping forward to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his palm warm against mine. "Jake hasn't stopped talking about you since we planned this trip." The initial awkwardness dissolved quickly as we fell into easy conversation. Jake poured drinks while Ryan and I discovered shared interests in obscure indie bands and foreign films. There was something disarming about Ryan's presence, a genuine warmth that made it impossible to dislike him, even if a small part of me wanted to. As the evening progressed, we moved to the deck overlooking the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and pink. The conversation flowed as freely as the wine, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. Jake sat between us, occasionally placing a hand on Ryan's knee or shoulder, little gestures of affection that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't ready to examine. As darkness fell, Ryan suggested we take advantage of the lake before it got too late. "The water's probably freezing," I protested, though the idea was tempting. The cabin had no hot tub or sauna, but the lake itself had always been a central part of any visit here. "Don't be such a wimp," Jake teased, already pulling his sweater over his head. "We'll build a fire after to warm up." Ryan was already stripping down to his boxers, revealing a lean, athletic build that I couldn't help but notice. Not wanting to seem like the odd one out, I reluctantly began removing my own clothes, suddenly self-conscious about my body in a way I hadn't been around Jake before. The water was indeed freezing, our shouts and laughter echoing across the lake as we plunged in. There was something primal and freeing about swimming in the dark, the cold water washing away the tensions of the city and work and complicated feelings. We splashed and raced each other to a floating dock, our bodies pale shadows in the moonlight. At one point, Jake grabbed my shoulders from behind, dunking me underwater, and when I emerged sputtering, Ryan was laughing so hard he nearly choked. It felt good, this camaraderie, even as I noticed the easy way Jake and Ryan moved around each other, their bodies familiar with one another in ways mine wasn't. After about 20 minutes, the cold became too much to bear, and we scrambled back to shore, teeth chattering and skin prickling with goosebumps. We hurried back to the cabin, leaving wet footprints on the wooden deck. Inside, Jake immediately set about building a fire in the stone fireplace, while Ryan disappeared into the bedroom. I stood dripping and shivering in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do with myself. "I should have brought a robe," I muttered, rubbing my arms to generate some warmth. Ryan returned a moment later with a large, plush robe in his hands, navy blue with white piping along the edges. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. "Jake and I can share the other one." I hesitated, not wanting to take their robe, but Ryan insisted. "Don't worry about it. We're all friends here, right?" There was something in his tone, a hint of playfulness that made me wonder if there was more to his words than simple friendliness. Before I could respond, Jake called from the fireplace. "The fire's catching. Come get warm." We huddled near the growing flames, the heat gradually thawing our frozen limbs. Jake and Ryan shared the remaining robe, their bodies pressed close together under the thick terry cloth. I tried not to stare at the way Ryan's arm wrapped around Jake's waist, or the comfortable way Jake leaned into him. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. We talked about nothing and everything: work stories, travel dreams, embarrassing college memories that made Jake groan and me laugh. As the night wore on, the fire began to die down, and a chill crept back into the room. Ryan noticed me shivering despite the robe and nudged Jake. "Look at poor Alex over there, all alone in his robe." There was that playful tone again, making me both nervous and curious. Jake looked at me, then at Ryan, something unspoken passing between them. "We could share," Jake suggested casually, as if offering to share a bag of chips rather than body heat. "That robe is big enough for 3 if we squeeze." My heart rate picked up, but I played it cool, shrugging as if the idea didn't send a jolt through my entire body. "If you guys don't mind," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ryan was already moving, shifting to make space between them. "Come on," he said, patting the spot on the couch. "We don't bite. Unless you're into that." Jake elbowed him, but they were both smiling as I hesitantly moved to join them. It was awkward at first, trying to arrange 3 adult men under one oversized robe. Our shoulders pressed together, thighs touching, the scent of lake water still clinging to our skin mingling with Jake's familiar cologne and something citrusy that must have been Ryan's. "This isn't working," Jake said after a minute of uncomfortable shifting. "Here, let me." He stood up, taking the robe with him, leaving Ryan and me suddenly exposed to the cool air. Jake moved behind the couch, draping the robe over our shoulders from behind like a cape. "Lean forward," he instructed, and we did. That's when Ryan had his idea. "Wait, I know how to make this work better," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. He took the edges of the robe, and, instead of wrapping them around himself and Jake, he brought them around to my front, essentially cocooning me between them. "Jake, tie it," he directed, and before I could process what was happening, Jake had reached around and tied the belt of the robe behind my back, binding the 3 of us together in a warm, intimate embrace. "There," Ryan said, settling back against the couch, his arm now necessarily draped across my shoulders. "Much better." And then he smiled at me, not Jake's familiar smile that I'd known for years, but something new and intriguing, a smile that seemed to hold secrets and possibilities I hadn't considered before. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the position I was in, literally sandwiched between my best friend and his boyfriend, our bodies pressed together under the shared warmth of the robe. Jake's chest was warm against my back, his breath tickling my ear as he leaned forward. "Comfortable?" he asked, and I couldn't tell if there was more to his question than simple concern for my physical comfort. I nodded, not trusting my voice at that moment. Ryan's hand moved slightly on my shoulder, his thumb tracing small circles that could have been absent-minded or deliberately soothing. I couldn't tell which, and wasn't sure which I hoped it was. The silence that fell wasn't awkward, but charged with something I couldn't name. The fire popped loudly, making me jump slightly, which only pressed me closer to Jake behind me. He didn't move away. Instead, his hand came to rest lightly on my hip, a touch that could be interpreted as steadying or something more. My mind raced with questions and possibilities, wondering if I was reading too much into the situation or not enough. "So," Ryan said finally, breaking the silence, "Jake tells me you 2 have never been more than friends." There was a question in his statement, one that made my heart race. I felt Jake tense slightly behind me, waiting for my response. The truth was complicated. Jake and I had met in our first year of college, instantly connecting over shared classes and similar senses of humor. There had been moments over the years, late nights studying, drunken confessions, lingering hugs, that hinted at something more than friendship, but neither of us had ever crossed that line. "That's right," I said carefully, aware of how Jake's hand still rested on my hip. "Just friends." Ryan's eyes held mine, searching for something. Whatever he found made him smile again, that same knowing smile that made my stomach flip. "Interesting," was all he said, before changing the subject to a movie we'd all seen recently. The conversation resumed its easy flow, but there was an undercurrent now, a tension that hadn't been there before. As we talked, I became increasingly aware of every point of contact between our bodies. Jake's chest against my back, his hand occasionally squeezing my hip when he laughed. Ryan's arm around my shoulders, his knee pressed against mine. The robe created a bubble of intimacy, trapping our body heat and the scent of skin and subtle cologne. I found myself relaxing into their embrace, the initial awkwardness giving way to a comfortable warmth that felt surprisingly right. At some point, Jake reached for his wine glass on the coffee table, causing the robe to pull tight across my chest. Ryan steadied me with a hand on my thigh, his touch lingering longer than necessary. "Careful," he murmured, but he wasn't looking at Jake. He was looking at me, his eyes dark in the firelight. I swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of how close his face was to mine. Jake settled back behind me, his arm now fully wrapped around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder as he rejoined the conversation. "You know," Ryan said after a while, his voice thoughtful, "I've always believed that friendship is just another form of love." He looked between Jake and me, his expression open and curious. And sometimes the lines between different types of love get blurry. Jake's arm tightened around my waist, a gesture I couldn't interpret. Was he warning Ryan to back off or encouraging him to continue? "What do you think, Alex?" Ryan asked, his eyes never leaving mine. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something significant. "I think," I began slowly, "that relationships don't always fit into neat categories." Jake's breath was warm against my neck, waiting for me to continue. "And sometimes feelings evolve in ways you don't expect." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Jake remained silent behind me, but I could feel the rapid beat of his heart against my back. "Have your feelings for Jake ever evolved?" Ryan asked directly, cutting through any pretense. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibilities and potential consequences. I could lie, maintain the status quo of our friendship, or I could take a risk and speak the truth I'd been avoiding for years. The warmth of the robe, the intimacy of our position, and something in Ryan's encouraging expression made me brave. "Yes," I admitted quietly, the word barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "They have." I felt Jake go still behind me, his breathing shallow. Ryan's expression softened, his hand squeezing my shoulder gently. "For how long?" he asked, his voice kind rather than accusatory. I swallowed, unable to look back at Jake as I answered. "Since our second year of college." The night we stayed up all night talking about our futures on the roof of the dorm. Jake made a small sound behind me. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Jake's voice was quiet, his lips close to my ear. I shrugged, the movement constrained by the robe still tied around us. "I didn't want to risk our friendship. And then there was always someone else. You were dating Michael, then Ethan, then—" I gestured toward Ryan, who was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. I guess the timing never seemed right. Ryan's hand moved from my shoulder to my cheek, turning my face gently toward him. "And now," he asked, his voice soft, "how do you feel now?" I looked into his eyes, confused by his question and his touch. "I don't understand," I said honestly. "You and Jake are together. My feelings don't matter." Ryan smiled, glancing over my shoulder at Jake. "What if they do matter?" he asked. "What if they matter to both of us?" Jake's hand moved from my waist to my shoulder, turning me slightly so I could see his face. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way I rarely saw. "Ryan and I have talked about this," he said quietly. "About you. About us." My heart hammered in my chest, confusion and hope warring within me. "What do you mean?" I asked, looking between them. Ryan's hand was still on my cheek, Jake's on my shoulder, both of them holding me in place physically and emotionally. "I've had feelings for you too, Alex," Jake admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "For years. But like you, I was afraid of ruining our friendship. And then I met Ryan, and—" He looked at his boyfriend, a smile softening his features. "And I fell in love with him. But that didn't make my feelings for you disappear." Ryan nodded, his thumb stroking my cheekbone gently. "When Jake told me about you, about the history between you two, I was curious," Ryan explained. "And then when we met tonight, I understood what Jake meant. There's something special about you, Alex." My mind struggled to process what they were saying. "So what are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan and Jake exchanged a look over my shoulder, some silent communication passing between them. "We're not suggesting anything specific," Ryan said carefully. "We're just acknowledging feelings that have been ignored for too long." What happens next is up to all three of us. The robe suddenly felt too warm, too confining. Can we untie this? I asked, needing some physical space to think clearly. Ryan nodded, reaching behind my back to undo the belt. As the robe fell open, cool air rushed in, but none of us moved apart immediately. We remained in our close position, the physical connection maintained even as the fabric barrier was removed. I need to know what you want, I said, looking first at Jake, then at Ryan. Both of you, because I can't come between you. Jake's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. You wouldn't be coming between us, he said softly. You'd be joining us. Ryan nodded in agreement, his hand still resting lightly on my thigh. We're not asking for a decision tonight, he added. Just openness to possibilities. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting the room in a soft, intimate light. Outside, the lake lapped gently at the shore, a rhythmic sound that had always soothed me. I looked at Jake, my best friend, the man I'd loved silently for years, and then at Ryan, who had opened a door I never thought possible. I'm open to possibilities, I said finally, the words feeling right as they left my lips. Jake's smile was radiant, relief and joy mingling in his expression. Ryan squeezed my thigh gently, his own smile matching Jake's. Good, he said simply. That's all we're asking for tonight. The tension in the room shifted, transforming into something expectant and hopeful. Jake leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from me. Can I? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, unable to form words as he closed the distance between us. His lips were soft against mine, the kiss gentle and questioning. Years of friendship and unspoken feelings culminated in this moment, making my heart race and my hands tremble. When we parted, Ryan was watching us, his expression a mixture of affection and desire. My turn, he asked, his voice teasing but his eyes serious, seeking permission. Jake nodded encouragingly, and I found myself doing the same. Ryan's kiss was different from Jake's, more confident, exploratory, but equally tender. His hand cradled my jaw, guiding me into the kiss with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. When he pulled back, I felt dizzy with the newness of it all, caught between my longtime feelings for Jake and the unexpected connection with Ryan. The rest of the night unfolded in a series of conversations, confessions, and cautious touches. We moved the mattresses from the bedrooms to the floor in front of the fireplace, creating a makeshift bed large enough for the three of us. We didn't rush into anything physical beyond those initial kisses, all of us understanding that whatever was developing between us needed time and care to grow properly. As we lay together under blankets, the robe that had started it all draped over a nearby chair, Jake in the middle with Ryan and me on either side, I felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from my life. Jake's hand held mine across his chest, while Ryan's arm draped over both of us. We talked until the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, making plans for the coming days at the cabin and tentative plans for what might come after. Morning found us still tangled together, the boundaries between friendship and something more beautifully blurred. As I watched Jake and Ryan prepare breakfast in the kitchen, moving around each other with practiced ease, but now including me in their orbit, I thought about the robe that had brought us together, how Ryan had tied it behind my back and smiled, opening a door to possibilities I never thought could exist. The weekend at the cabin became the beginning of something we were still defining, still exploring with care and communication. Whatever label eventually fit what was growing between the three of us, I knew one thing for certain. I would never look at a bathrobe the same way again. And whenever life got complicated or doubts crept in, I would remember that moment by the fire, wrapped in warmth and possibility, when Ryan tied the robe behind my back and smiled, changing everything with a simple gesture and the courage to acknowledge unspoken feelings. As we packed up to return to the city on Sunday evening, Jake folded the blue robe and pressed it into my hands. A souvenir, he said with a smile that held promises of more weekends, more conversations, more exploration of the connection we'd discovered. Ryan wrapped his arms around both of us, pulling us into a group hug that felt like coming home. To new beginnings, he said, and Jake and I echoed his words, the three of us standing on the threshold of something unexpected and beautiful, bound together by honesty and the courage to embrace possibilities. Total underscore char underscore count, 18,742.